Hi, everyone. My name is Colin Duggan. I'm a co-founder and CEO of BG Networks, a cybersecurity company. This is the second in our series of bi-weekly webinars talking about medical device cybersecurity. And my co-hosts here are Roman. Do you mind introducing yourself, Roman?
Hey, I'm Roman Lysicki, co-founder, CTO of BG Networks.
And Eric?
Yeah, I'm Eric Bettis, and I lead up the medical device cybersecurity arm of what we offer.
And with this webinar series, we look to provide insights into medical device cybersecurity, not too long, maybe 15, 20 minutes, and to make them very digestible chunks to help you come up to speed on regulatory requirements and expectations for cybersecurity. Today, what we're going to talk about is what the FDA expects. We're going to give you an overview of the 15 or so things that the FDA expects. So, you listen to this for the next 15 minutes, you're going to know what you need to do to meet FDA expectations for medical device cybersecurity. And this is the what. What do they expect? In our next video, in a couple of weeks, we're going to go over the why. Why do they expect these things, and how do these things help make a medical device more secure? But we're going to start off with a little bit of news. And in the beginning segment of these videos, we're going to talk about news and talk about how it relates to medical device cybersecurity, and hopefully along the way make it interesting. And overall, we want to make these dialogues and discussions fun. So the news that we want to talk about is probably three different things you've heard about. One is the hack of the US Treasury, the hack of, believe it or not, 9 telephony companies in the United States, and kind of hacking of critical infrastructure that's been going on for the last year against United States critical infrastructure. So the first one, the US Treasury, it was hacked by a APT, an Advanced Persistent Threat Group, who gained access to Treasury servers. But the good news is no classified information was exfiltrated. The group hasn't been named, but it is alleged that it's a Chinese-sponsored group. And they got in with what's called the zero-day vulnerability. They found essentially bugs in software, and they were able to exploit those bugs to gain access to those servers. The second hack is against 9 cellular telephone carriers. The APT is named. It's called Salt Typhoon, again, another Chinese-sponsored group. And don't confuse Salt Typhoon with Volt Typhoon, and that's the third hack that we'll just mention here. Volt Typhoon is another Chinese APT. They've actually been attacking critical infrastructure for the United States for about the past year and targeting communication systems and water systems. And it seems that their intent isn't to steal data or information. It's actually to position themselves in terms of espionage and to disrupt operations at some time in the future. So what does all this mean for medical devices? First, state-sponsored groups are definitely groups you need to think about as you are securing your medical devices. Second, critical infrastructure is clearly the target of not only Chinese, but other national state-sponsored hacking groups. And then third is patching is so important. We see that in the Treasury hack, where, again, 2 vulnerabilities which to that point weren't known, 2 bugs that weren't known were exploited. And the way the vulnerability was mediated was through a software update, being able to patch that software quickly. So that's definitely a critical capability to think about in your medical devices. So, Roman, Eric, what do you think about this news? Any thoughts, comments?
Just another example. I mean, to some extent, it's news, but it's not news. We've seen this before. We'll see it again. We shouldn't be surprised. I think to me, the real takeaway is oftentimes when you're trying to do threat modeling and you're considering what are the threat scenarios, who should you be worried about, you might write off, these kind of, oh, okay, we don't need to worry about, really well-sponsored organizations. We're not the target. They're going to go after somebody else. But I don't think you can really do that. I think you at least need to give it consideration of, what would they target our systems? What could they get to? because the backing you have for those types of really well-sponsored groups, whoever they are, criminal, nation state, otherwise, it really comes down to they're going to be able to execute more sophisticated attacks than other smaller groups. And so that's where I think you need to start worrying about them. So it's at least you got to consider it and don't just write it off when you're doing your threat risk assessment.
Yeah, and I would just add that due to the nature of software development, and if anybody's been part of software development, especially with agile models, we will always have vulnerabilities, and we will always have people that will exploit them.
Great. Thanks, guys. So now we're going to dive in to the FDA's guidance. The document we're going to refer to is the September 2023 document titled Cybersecurity Medical Devices, Quality System Considerations, and Content of Pre-Market Submissions. We'll break this down. We'll give a short overview, maybe a minute or so, of the 15 or so things that they've outlined in this guidance, as they expect it. And, the document is broken down in a number of sections. The first section is called General Principles. It starts right off with cybersecurity being part of device safety and quality system regulations. Guys, what do you think? Why the FDA put cybersecurity in, lump it in with, safety and effectiveness quality system regs?
Security is safety. Your device isn't secure and someone can tamper with it, then how do you guarantee any of the safety that you've designed into that? I know it's sort of a simplified way of viewing it, but it really is true. If you don't have a secure design, you don't have a safe design.
Yeah, I mean, there are safety features that can impact cyber, and there are cyber features that can impact safety. At the end of the day, it's all part of 21 CFR 820.30, the product development process, and they're tied together. We talk about the need for a secure product development framework on the cyber side. All it really is a quality management system for software development from a cyber perspective. So they have to be nestled together. And as we move into the future, we'll see more of an integrative approach between the two as firms gain maturity.
Yeah, I think great point, guys. And to bring both points together, the process that you use for cybersecurity, Eric, as you said, a secure product development framework, it needs to integrate with your safety and effectiveness process also, because to your point, Roman, they're closely related, right? If a cyber attack causes a medical device, to operate incorrectly because, data has been tampered with and incorrect data is being presented to a physician, it's going to affect safety. So absolutely, there is a safety consideration, and even denial of service of medical devices can be considered something that affects safety because the therapy might not be available when the patient needs it. So yeah, great. And then the next thing, Eric, is your foreshadowing is here is in the document is secure product development framework. They say it may be one way to satisfy the quality system regs. I think they're maybe leaving options open there a little bit, but I think it is the way. Would you agree?
Yeah, it is the way. Yeah, I mean, you develop code, you don't do it twice, once to 62304 and then go back over it to 81001-5-1. You don't do that. You develop the code. So you have to be looking at it from a safety perspective and a cyber perspective at the very same time with the same hat. Otherwise, it's extremely inefficient.
Yeah, you don't have a separate team writing the code for your safety implementation and basic functionality, and you have a completely separated team that's trying to secure that code and put in the structure. They're the same team.
Same
so
team.
You can't decouple them. They're just inexplicably interconnected in there. And at the same time, the FDA, they're not prescriptive. They're not saying you must do exactly this. They're saying here are the requirements. okay, there are more than one way to do it. The way they layer out is probably a good recommendation. You probably should follow it. Otherwise, you have a lot more effort to justify why your different way is just as good as kind of the way they're suggesting in their guidance.
That's right. And I think, Roman, they can't be prescriptive because everybody's system is different. And if they were prescriptive, everybody would try to give exactly that very prescriptive thing to the FDA, even if it didn't, match their system or wasn't the security they really needed at the end of the day.
That's right.
Yeah, don't worry. They'll be prescriptive in their 483s and their warning letters. Very, very.
Eric, I learned something very interesting about you yesterday. You commented to me that you love reading warning letters, right?
I generally documentation that comes out of the agency is well crafted, and it's a. I mean, when I was a kid, I didn't tell my mom, when I grow up, I want to read FDA warning letters and 483s and be wowed. But it's pleasant reading. It's well crafted. It flows well.
That's great. Hey, sorry to reveal your secret there. I apologize.
But we're trying to help people understand what's required so they don't get those letters.
Yeah, exactly, Roman. 100%. That's right.
Yeah.
We don't want to read them too much.
No.
That's right.
Next topic that's moving us along here is transparency. What do you guys think the FDA means by transparency?
Don't hide stuff, right? If you have an interface on your device, you have to disclose you have an interface on your device, because and then you have to secure it. So I think transparency is really just whatever is important to disclose and describe and secure in your system. You have to be, put that out there for the FDA to be able to assess it, so you actually get a good assessment of the security of the device.
Yeah, and it's kind of pay me now or pay me later. Hiding things doesn't really work very well. I used to tell my kids when I thought they were doing something inappropriate, I said, just remember, I never ask a question that I don't already know the answer to. And then they basically fall at my knees and confess. So it's a good approach to take with the FDA, because ultimately, if they come and they look, they will find. So it's best to reveal up front, and nobody's trying to be malicious here. Sometimes things are just overlooked, but yeah, it's good to be transparent.
Yeah, and I also, go ahead, Roman. Sorry.
I was just going to say, the way I think about it as well is it's sort of the counterpoint to any inkling of a thought of you can gain true security through obscurity. Oh, if somebody doesn't know about it, then it's secure. And I think what the FDA is saying with transparency is that's not really true. Someone will figure it out. We should know about it now so we know it's actually secure.
Yeah, and that's what hackers do, right? So
exactly. They find things.
They find things.
The last section in the general principles kind of opening main section is about submission documentation. And we'll talk about that as we go here. As we go through these topics, we'll highlight what submission documentation the FDA is looking for. Is 12, 13 documents that you'll find in the eStar system, just depending on how you divide things up. So next main section is using an SPDF to manage cybersecurity risks. So they'll talk in this section about cybersecurity risks. They have a subsection on security risk management. It's defined by 5 things, which we'll go through right now. First one is threat modeling. Can you guys talk a little bit about threat modeling and what it is, specifically for medical device?
Yeah, I mean, threat modeling, it's for, I'll talk generally because it really applies to any system you need to secure. I think the unique aspect of medical devices is really the safety aspects and the patient harm that could come with stuff. So your threat scenarios should certainly consider the damage that happens to a patient. But the threat scenarios are really trying to be systematic and thorough, to think through what's in your system, what are the assets that are part of it, what's important to protect, and what are the potential threats that you should be considering for your system that could lead to these sort of patient harm or loss of patient private data. So the threat modeling side is really to have a good understanding ahead of time of what are the threats you should consider. They might be, there may not be a attack that can successfully execute that threat right now, but there could be in the future. There might be threats you know exist, and you need to make sure you're considering those. So you're actually putting in the right security. So all of this threat modeling, it's going to tie into the next topic that's in there too, but it's really to help you put in the right controls and think through what is the right control. And it's really starting with the threats is kind of that beginning point of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can't have a risk mitigation control without a risk assessment, and you can't have a risk assessment without a good threat model. I look at it as the foundation that we build upon.
Yeah, and when we do our threat modeling, we like to start from scratch and like to do it in a comprehensive way to make sure we don't miss anything. And you also end up with very kind of complete documentation and show the FDA that you've done a good job. A lot of times, we'll find that customers already implemented security at some level because intuitively they know, hey, we need to have user access control, right, to this PC, for example. But then you do want to start from kind of first principles, though, right from the beginning. And I think a good threat model, will help you really make sure you haven't missed anything. And then, like, Eric, you brought up the risk assessment. The threat model flows naturally into the risk assessment. And that's the way you determine what your features are for cybersecurity. And if you do a good threat model and risk assessment, you pretty much determine what you need, and you also determine what you don't need, which is a nice outcome from that exercise. So you're not spending time on maybe implementing security that doesn't really add that much to your design.
And that's that next category, right after threat modeling and the FDA guidance is cybersecurity risk assessment, because those two are connected. So you know what you're trying to protect in your system, you know what your threats you're considering, but then it's what's the risk. And that's really trying to look at, how could somebody potentially attack your system, and what would the damage be if they successfully succeed in that? And sort of the combination of those two give you your risk. And if it's a high risk, you should do something about it, mitigate it, put in a better control, redesign the component if you have to. But that's a key piece of then deciding the controls you actually need. So I think you made a good point. A lot of times you already have security in there. Intuitively, you already know, don't design a system where you don't have passwords and passwords with good strength requirements. But if you don't go through the systematic process, it's very easy to still have gaps. And I think that's why this systematic process and starting from scratch, working through it all really helps you find the gaps. So you put in the right controls to mitigate your risk.
That's great. Guys, what do you think about the next one here? Interoperability considerations. This is probably not a really heavy one, but an important one.
I think it's, you just have to consider how your device connects to other networks, infrastructure, other devices, and making sure you've thought through in your threat and risk assessment all those various considerations. Like if you're connecting in a hospital network, okay, you don't have control over that hospital network. You have to, how do you figure out how to still make your design secure when it does have to interoperate with these other systems that you didn't design as a company, someone else designed? I think that's really just kind of capturing, these are considerations you have to directly think about when you're doing your threat risk assessment.
Yeah, I mean, not considering it is a huge miss. It's all about scoping or a systems approach. You have to cover every impact that could be out there. It's kind of fundamental.
Next one here is third-party software bill of materials. I'll start off by saying, when the FDA came out with the initial guidance, after the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act was modified to add Section 524B, which gave the FDA authority to mandate and enforce security. In March of 2023, they basically highlighted 4 things. One of them was SBOMs, another one was threat intelligence, and then the third was patchability. And those 3 things go together. And SBOMs is one of these elements under this risk management area. And what it means is you know what's in your software. And if you have good threat intelligence, you'll know when vulnerabilities are exposed, hacks happen, and then you'll know, does it affect you? Because you know if it affects that piece of software or not. And again, like we talked about in the beginning with the news, patchability is important because you know your software, you know it's been hacked. Well, what do you want to do? You want to upgrade the software so you can close that vulnerability. So the SBOM one is definitely one that the FDA is very keen on. You want to make sure you do a good job with your SBOM, and then identifying vulnerabilities in your SBOM. And then the 5th one here is total product lifecycle, and it's related to the SBOM. Again, it's not a one and done. It's something you get to monitor over the lifetime of the device. Risk is not static. Risk can change over time. If a new bug is found in a software component that you're using, you certainly have a higher level of risk, and you want to address that. So I quickly, just to move us along a little bit, rapid fire went through those 2. Roman, Eric, what do you think? Do you have additional thoughts on that?
I would say the interesting aspect here, I think, is there's a parallel between the interoperability and the SBOM component. Interoperability is about you're running in with other systems you didn't design. And it's the same thing for third-party software. You're using a library that you didn't write the code for. So you don't have full control over it. And so if there are vulnerabilities found, how do you take that into consideration of making sure your device is still secure, even in spite of there being third-party software that you're leveraging and utilizing? And how do you tie that all together with constant monitoring throughout your life cycle, post-market, all the way to the end of life?
Yeah, when you talk about a BOM, you can't make a medical device without a BOM. You can't have configuration management or change control without a BOM. I mean, it's almost like everything. It's so basically fundamental. So why would this be a shocker on the software side? Because we have to identify our risks. We have to evaluate them, implement risk mitigation measures, and it's not one and done because it's always changing. So how do you do any of that without an SBOM? I don't know.
So
the fact that it's coming out now is telling. I mean, why are these requirements? Why did 524B just come out now? Why are we requiring an SBOM? It's almost like requiring brakes in a car. It's so basically fundamental. That's how I look at it. Just because I've been in that device for 30 years, maybe not on the cyber side, but how do you control something that's not defined? SBOM.
I'll just add one more thing on the total product lifecycle, which is it's not just about SBOMs and vulnerabilities that exist in the software. It's also about there may be new attacks or methods that hackers will use in the future. They don't affect your device because we don't know about them.
Mm-hmm.
If they come out with them and it does affect your device, it's rethinking your risk assessment.
Yeah.
Given this new information, there's a new attack path you never considered when you designed the device, but now it's possible. Okay, let's go reconsider that, and can we fix it with a software update? Can we still mitigate that risk? So it's not just vulnerabilities, it's being able to really think holistically about security all the way through.
Yeah, and keeping it a living document and monitoring the vulnerabilities through the life cycle and the end of life of your product. Again, if you don't have an SBOM, you can't do that at all.
That's great, guys. And just to highlight under risk management, the threat model is a document the FDA requires, the risk assessment, the SBOM. So there's 3 items very specifically that you need to fill in or need to provide. Next section under managing cybersecurity risk is cybersecurity architecture. And I'm just going to move us through that really quickly. One of them is implementation of security controls. There's an appendix which lists the 8 security controls. It's the basics of cryptography, and it's probably just about every single device that's network connected should have some element of all those 8 categories in it. I think it would be an unusual case, for a connected medical device if you didn't. So definitely excellent appendix that's there. And then security architecture views. So that is another one of the submission documents. There's 4 different views. The FDA really wants to get an understanding architecturally, and I think there's also the benefit when you draw these 4 views out, you're going to get a much better understanding of the threat surface and the points where attackers could actually exploit vulnerabilities in your device. And we usually start even before the threat and risk assessment. We draw the cybersecurity system and the architectural views. So we usually have a pretty good start on that submission document, because it's a great way to start in terms of the overall process. So getting just to the end here, guys, the last section, cybersecurity transparency, there's labeling in there, and there's cybersecurity management plans, which you guys have already touched upon, the total product lifecycle, which is what the cybersecurity management plan's all about. But comment more, if you don't mind, around the labeling recommendations and what the FDA is requiring for cybersecurity management plans.
Yeah, I think for cybersecurity management, a key aspect there is making sure you have plans beyond just your pre-market submission design. What are your plans? Who's responsible for that within your organization? How are you responding to it? Are you tracking metrics? They actually outlay some specific metrics they're interested in seeing in terms of having that ongoing plan, because they know it doesn't stop. You'll have to do patches. You'll have to respond to vulnerabilities, and you need a plan for being able to do so. And so you can say it's part of your software development framework, but a part of that is the ongoing process. When you're monitoring, how often you're monitoring, how you're patching, how you're updating. So I think that's just a really big component of really having that total product lifecycle cybersecurity frame point. You need to have a cybersecurity risk management plan.
Yeah, and when we talk about labeling, labeling is a big deal in med device. Labeling could be your marketing material that's up on the web, your television commercials. It's the labels on the product that identify it. It's the instruction for use, or the owner's manual for the medical device, that provides instruction and guidance to the user, physician, or human who's going to use it. And if labeling is incorrect, it's typically would result in a recall, which is a big deal. So when we look at risk mitigation controls, not everything can be mitigated by the designer manufacturer. Some of the mitigation has to be implemented by the user. And so you've got to be able to go from your risk assessment with the risks that require mitigation, can't be mitigated by designing it into the product. So you put it into your IFU, instruction for use, and provide it to the user, where the user has to implement strong passwords. They have to implement a firewall, so on and so forth. And if they don't implement those things, the risks aren't mitigated. So labeling is a strong connection to risk mitigation.
And I think it's kind of hey, here's how to use our software. Here's how to make sure it's used in a secure way when you install that within your system. So like the SAMD systems are a great aspect of that.
Mm-hmm.
Software as a medical device. You're delivering software that's going to run on a PC maintained by a hospital. In order to truly secure that, the PC itself has to be secure. The firewalls have to be correctly turned on and configured. The user management and access control for those systems has to be done correctly by your IT infrastructure in your hospitals. And so I think the instructions for use are there to say, hey, here are the things that are really important for this particular SAMD we're offering. These things have to be in place for this to be able to work. And then, that's part of that labeling. It's a very broad category, but that's a key part of the overall security.
Mm-hmm.
That's great, guys. We're just about at time, and we got through all 15 items. So I think we did pretty well. Any final thoughts?
Well, I mean, there's certainly each one of those has some layers below it and some nuance there to be able to put that all together. You know, I still, every time I come back and reread the guidance, um, I think it's well crafted. It's thorough. It's highlighting the key points. In particular, I think it's all the examples of insecure devices you see of, hey, you could have addressed this insecurity and not had this recall or vulnerability discovered later. It's really trying to put all that together and say, hey, if you follow this process and you do it well, you're going to have a good device out of the gate. And if you have the ongoing processes in place, you'll be able to respond to an incident that you don't know what it's going to be, but you're ready to handle it when it does happen.
And
That's
all
right.
all of this infrastructure allows you to continue to manage and monitor for the lifetime of the device. It could be 10, 15 years. So it makes your job easier in the future. It's not a one and done.
That's great, guys. Great stuff. We'll wrap it up here. And like I said in the beginning, today we went through the what. Next week, we'll go through the why. And as Roman implied, in subsequent weeks, we'll dive into each of these topics and give you more insight one by one, as there are multiple layers to go through for each of the things we mentioned today. So thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you in a couple of weeks.